Hello everybody, and you're all very welcome to today's webinar. My name is Paul Dwyer. I'm the CEO of Cyber Risk International, and today what we'd like to talk to you about is C19, COVID-19, and the impact that has had, obviously on our operation models for our businesses, but more importantly, the impact that has had in relation to cyber risk and our ability to deal with the consequences of that. So I'm going to outline over the next 30-40 minutes the major impacts, and then I'm going to highlight and focus on 10 key things you can do in order to implement, develop and mature your cyber resilience program. And finally, I will sum up with a number of things that we can do to help you, we being Cyber Risk International, how we can utilize our Cyber Prism platform. That's the award-winning platform that can help organizations actually understand what the risk posture is. I'll talk a little bit about how we've developed that specifically to deal with C19 related cyber impacts, picking up on the inherent risk data points around that, i.e. people working from home and so on. Finally, we'll talk about a little bit about the CCRO course. That's the Certified Cyber Risk Officer course that ICTTF are very proud to announce our partnership with the ICA, that's the International Compliance Association, and the ICS, the Irish Computer Society, bringing that to the world, and it's already been a global success in helping to develop and share those skills with key business leaders so that they can understand how to deal with these sort of challenges themselves and establish the appropriate controls and frameworks within their own organizations. So look, without further ado, I'm going to dive straight into the topic, and we'll start the presentation. So the elephant in the room is COVID-19 itself. And I suppose the fact of also that everybody did whatever they had to continue with business, to keep the business operational. And that elephant in the room, it goes beyond the impact of the global pandemic itself, but the fact that rules may have been broken. Shadow IT may have carried out activities. So by that I mean is that they may have carried out activities that weren't in line with official policy or procedures in order just to get people operational, working from home and be able to continue with the business. And that's just a fact of life that has carried on with businesses large and small as a result of the impact of COVID-19. Some would say that COVID-19 itself, C19, is a black swan event. From a risk perspective, the metaphor of a black swan is something, a risk event that is very surprising, but with hindsight, we feel that it may be a new normal. Certainly, what I would suggest is that the impact of COVID-19 means that the new normal will be new. There will be a different way of working, a different way of operating, a different viewpoint on how we actually deal with the cyber related impacts that have come from this change in our operational models, not just from a business perspective, but society itself. So let's look at the impact of COVID-19. Well, first of all, it has caused chaos in the global economy. That's just a fact. Everybody's expecting this global recession to come as part of that. But even on a very short-term, immediate level, the impact it's had on businesses large and small, even in relation to nations, cash flow, nation states having to look to borrow money in order to be able to provide funds to their own citizens and so on to be able to live and exist. The impact it's had on the financial sector, having to put and facilitate being able to put people's mortgages effectively on hold or payment breaks for a short period of time, payment runs for businesses, and so on and so forth. There's just a never-ending impact in relation to that knock-on effect, quote-unquote contagion effect it's had in relation to the global economy. So nobody has avoided that, large or small. Disruption in supply chains, the very fact of being able to depend on supply chains, the logistics, the operations, being able to get things delivered, being able to get services delivered. There's been a huge increase on certain digital services being delivered. So it may be a positive and a negative, but there's an impact there on supply chains, both from a logistics point of view and just a service point of view, being able to get normal services supplied to businesses. If that involves face-to-face interaction, that has been hugely impacted, obviously. services online may be doing better in some ways and in some cases. So there's been a huge impact and disruption in relation to supply chains itself. It has transformed society, how we're all socially distancing, how we're working, how we're operating, even in relation to the working from home aspect of it, childcare, all of those aspects that have been impacted have transformed society in the way it's operating today and how it will continue to operate in the short to medium term, and no doubt in the long term this will have impacts on how society operates. It has certainly accelerated business model transformation. So for example, we've seen this with lots of businesses that normally may have a certain timeline or timescale to roll out certain facilities or features or whatever it happens to be, but the business models have had to adapt and transform overnight in some cases, and so this has caused, it's been a huge catalyst in transforming how business models are operating. So you may have had a traditional business that worked in a retail bricks and mortar type environment with only a small amount of business maybe being done online. This has certainly transformed people's business model in those cases into being primarily or maybe even totally online. It's had a huge impact, a massive impact on the inherent cyber risk level of businesses. So again, to remind ourselves what the inherent cyber risk level is, that's the inherent risk a business has depending on how it uses and leverages cyber related technology, the people, the processes, everything around providing those cyber-based services. So we're not just talking about online services, but the use of technology in the business, whether it's mobile phones, whether it's cloud computing, whether it's cloud-based services, whatever it happens to be. All of those things carry a certain amount of risk depending on the amount of staff, the physical geolocation of the business and so on. All of those things factor into a metric known as your inherent cyber risk, and that drives the appropriate controls that should be in a business and the appropriate maturity level they should be at. Increased reliance on the digital economy. That goes for everything from businesses, from B2B and B2C. So for consumers, for businesses alike, there has been now this increased reliance on the digital economy. Whereas people beforehand may have done things in a different way, they're now relying on being able to order things online, being able to communicate through video, for conference meetings, for day-to-day interactions. So there's a massive increase in the reliance now on the digital economy itself. So let's look at some other areas. There's obviously an increased reliance on the internet. So beforehand, where something, even from a residential perspective, may have been something that was very important, may now be almost a complete necessity in order to be able to work and operate, to have Wi-Fi or to have an internet connection from a home base or a home office. So we can see, whether it's again consumers, whether it's small businesses, large, there is this huge increased reliance on the internet to be able to reach out and connect to other people or businesses in a way that doesn't require face-to-face physical interaction. There's an increased cyber threat activity. I mean, all of the law enforcement agencies around the world and the larger groupings of the likes of Europol, the Interpol and so on, have all reported, including local law enforcement right across Europe and throughout the world, have reported a massive increase. We even had the World Health Organization reporting on the increased cyber threat activity, all based around COVID-19 scams, whether it was anything from sending out SMS messages to say to people that it was part of contact tracing, or whether it was people pretending to be a charity, raising money for victims of COVID. All sorts of scams, from low-end ones up to very sophisticated invoice fraud, payment redirection. All those kinds of activities have gone through the roof. Some reporting up to 800% increase in activity on certain kinds of fraud. There's been acceleration. I mean, years have become months. I related to this just a little bit ago in relation to the business models being transformed, but it's pretty much in relation to anything to do with our businesses and our systems. Time is of the essence. There is no time in many cases for the checks and balances, for the normal control assurances that we would put in place before deploying technology, before letting users operate systems and access data. We're simply just giving them access. We're giving them VPN access and allowing them into systems. So that in itself brings along a huge amount of risk and danger. So the new rules are, there are no rules. I mean, again, I've alluded to this around shadow IT, cloud services, net architecture. The normal basis of deciding to use a particular supplier or a particular technology may become a decision that's made within minutes. Or certainly hours, as opposed to a procurement process, a long, elongated beauty parade of assessing which is the best kind of provider, the best kind of technology, best value for money, and certainly the most secure, and so on. Those things are being skipped right through in many, many cases. And again, I can't overemphasize the shadow IT aspect of people having to just get up and running under fire, so to speak, and be able to operate from home and work from home, and using personal equipment, using residential networks, maybe no encryption, no training, no anti-malware on the machines, just basic cyber hygiene controls in many cases we've come across that have been skipped. This has resulted in increased pressure not just on the supply chain but on the digital architecture itself. So thinking of this even from small businesses, medium, large enterprises, the capacity planning that they've had in place has to be completely reviewed. I mean, there's an absolute massive increase in relation to the demand from working from home, that flexibility, the pressure on certain providers and services that may have been availed of and contracted pre-COVID may now not suit what is required in a COVID era, so to speak. So from the point of view of the capacity of certain systems to use, whether it's, if I use a very mundane example of video conferencing, the amount of accounts that are available, the amount of accounts that people can log into and use, that may not be appropriate. So that in itself is a really small mundane example of pressure across the supply chain piece itself. There's also the psychological impact on humans themselves. I mean, we have to remember that we live in a constant 24/7 news era. This is new to everybody. It's the unknown. It's fearful. It's becoming very real to people. The scary stories. Also then the working from home, the distraction levels of potentially, maybe having to care for children and so on, or other relatives. During this period of time means that there's a huge psychological impact on our staff, and our staff are trying to operate, but they are operating in these environments that are not conducive to perhaps the most best way of handling cybersecurity and cyber risk. I'll give you a quick example of that. Would be something like, for example, lots of people going on conference calls, video conference calls, and leaking out information, not even being aware of it, maybe sharing the links on social media to those meetings, not being trained on how to properly use or the procedures on how to use video conferencing, and then maybe even having a conference call or a sensitive conference call using a personal laptop or even a child's laptop, as we've seen cases on some conference calls. They've used their children's laptops from home, which may be not secured and may have all kinds of malware on them. So that, of course, creates a risk exposure as well. So there's all of these factors that have been put together that is creating this issue. And we refer to this as the C19 Cyber Storm. And if nothing else, it gives me a brilliant opportunity to use what I have to refer to as probably the coolest slide I have ever put together. So hopefully you enjoyed the visuals of this and the cyberstorm. But let's look behind the factors that are making up this cyberstorm and this environment, this confluence, this convergence of all of these issues that are creating this unique risk profile for all of us. So we see it as being made up mainly of these areas. I mean, when we have our challenges to privacy, and I'll start off with that one. I mean, we look at people fundamentally perhaps giving up civil liberties for one particular reason, and that reason may be that they're willing to partake in contact tracing apps and so on. However, at the same token, we're seeing in the United States and other regions around the world that that very decision to cooperate and provide that kind of information is being used for other reasons by certain states. So, for example, we see that where this kind of information was also being used to identify people that were taking part in Black Lives Matter marches, and then being able to target them from that perspective. We also have, next up is the cyber threat actors themselves, this huge increase in activity. And at all levels of cyber threat activity. So I'm talking about the smaller, less sophisticated cyber threat actors who are scam artists trying to make a quick buck and trying to be opportunistic, sending out phishing emails, trying to hook people on, trying to get relatively small amounts of money from people, whether it's scams for fake charities, as I say, fees or fines to be paid for people visiting websites, all that kind of stuff. All of that kind of activity is going on. But there is also this huge amount of activity going on with the more sophisticated, organized cyber crime actors. And the fear is that they are enshrining themselves and penetrating into the corporate networks through the work from home endpoints that people have on and are using just to facilitate their way through this COVID-19 and to navigate their way through this. So we feel this storm is about to arrive within months, where we'll see people getting, if you like, their payback. The bad guys who've invested the time and effort to use this period of time, this opportunity, not just to make quick wins of defrauding people and so on, but to actually integrate themselves and instill themselves onto corporate networks while people were distracted, while security teams were, and technology teams and IT teams were busy doing other things like setting up people to work from home on VPNs, that they used all of these opportunities to be able to integrate themselves and penetrate onto corporate network systems. We have the digital infrastructure itself, the pressure that's on upon that from all the different links, if we think of in that digital infrastructure, because you've got to remember telcos are being operated by people who are also dealing with all these kind of challenges. So the internet service providers, so are all the cloud service providers. Every company, nobody is immune to the impact of C19. So everybody has this human to element and frailty factor, part of it, if you like, that they're all being impacted and they've all become more vulnerable to being exposed by cyber bad guys. So we also have the economy side of things, the impact on the economy, what may mean that certain organizations are withholding spending, cash flow issues, the global economy itself, people getting demotivated by being paid less, maybe restricted on where they go, and all of those impacts on the global economy and local economy are things that are being impacted by C19 and all feed into this frenzy. And then we have the geopolitics of this. I mean, we have well reported cases of nation state threat actors using this as an opportunity to hack into not just critical national infrastructure, but targeting the health sector itself, looking to ascertain what level of research has been done around cures for COVID-19, at what level organizations are at and other nations are at. So we're seeing espionage being carried on at a much greater level, certainly within the health sector and the critical national infrastructure sector as well. So all of these things are forming the major parts at the same time, and meaning that globally as an infrastructure, we're all becoming much more vulnerable, because we're all part of this interconnected, interdependent digital economy and digital society that we all live in, and the contagion factor from certain parts of this ecosystem being infected or being breached by cyber threat actors will have a knock-on effect to all of us. So let's look under the surface a little bit, and what do we see? We see that the working from home factor has obviously increased our attack surface. That's meant that critical assets have been exposed. We have the distracted workforce, and we have the critical national infrastructure, including the health sector itself, being attacked and being targeted, not just by nation states, I'll say, but also we've seen that with ransomware attacks, we've seen that with criminality just trying to make money and attacking these. They have no conscience, and they'll go after whoever they have, no matter what the impact is. It's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the most responsive to change. Charles Darwin. Favorite slide of mine, because I always think that, look, this is always going to be about those who have the ability to change, those that have the ability to be dynamic and deal with this dynamic cyber risk profile are going to do better at the end of the day. They're going to stand a much better chance of surviving and thriving in such an environment. We have to remember that the new normal that we're heading to at this moment is unknown, but it's certainly, we're not going back. This isn't about recovery back to how we were pre-COVID with our systems, with our policies and procedures and so on. There is an adjustment that needs to be carried out here. We're transitioning to a new state that we're all calling new normal, but nobody really knows what that new normal is. But certainly it is different, and we know certain parts of it. But as we transition, we need to also make sure that we are carrying out the appropriate risk management controls and cyber risk management techniques in order to deal with the risks as we transition, as we are in that journey of transitioning to the new normal. So we are interconnected, we're interdependent. So what affects one piece affects the other. And we're all, as I say, part of this digital economy, this digital society, and we have to work collectively together to protect it. Because, I mean, when we look at a business value chain of an organization and all the different elements it's made up for, we can appreciate this knock-on effect. In the same way, we can see the comparison with the biological virus and COVID, and how we're all interrelated, how the spikes occur with travel, with people not socially distancing and so on, and that there's an immediate impact. It's exactly the same when we're looking at this from a cyber perspective. It's that interaction, that interdependence between the systems, the information flows and so on, that means that we're all dependent on each other for cybersecurity. So a holistic approach is required. We're all in this together. It's not about, my systems are okay, I'm fine, that's okay. We can't operate in isolation. We all have to understand that it's about all of us upping the level of cybersecurity and cyber risk. It's about all of us taking a zero trust approach to the supply chain. It's about all of us making sure we've got basic cyber hygiene in place. It's going to protect all of us. So what would a C19 Cyber Storm look like? Well, recently we had Christine Lagarde, the president of the European Central Bank, warning that a significant cyber attack on a major financial institution could trigger a liquidity crisis. Well, where did this come from? This was just pre-COVID, and where this statement was really coming from was the fact that it has been recognized now since, effectively the G7 cyber fundamentals were put together for the financial sector to distill down those fundamentals of cyber security and cyber risk management throughout an organization. That the fact is the global economy, which relies on the financial sector, is completely interdependent on small, medium and large parts of that infrastructure, and that contagion effect of something happening within that system would have a massive impact on the global economy. This warning was a stark warning that it could cost in excess of 500 billion. It could cause a liquidity crisis and a knock-on effect. And what a C19 Cyberstorm may look like is the fact that the bad guys are no doubt working as hard as they can during this lockdown periods and so on to be able to find those weaknesses, those flaws, those vulnerabilities that have presented themselves as people were busy, distracted and implementing shadow IT just to be able to survive and just to able to operate, so that they can implant themselves within those systems across the financial sector around the world. So what's our target? Well, we need to aim towards a culture of shared risk ownership. This can't be just about each organization looking at themselves. We need to look at ourselves as part of a chain, part of a business value chain. Who are our customers? Let's make sure they're protected. Who are our suppliers? Are they protecting us? Are we protecting them? And make sure that there's no cross-contamination, cross-infections, cross-weaknesses between our systems. Aim towards business enablement beyond compliance. Compliance is only a baseline. Compliance will always be behind technology because compliance and regulations take time to write and put together and put in place, and they'll never be right up to date with the innovation and the technology that's out there. So if your business is an innovative business, if you're enabling the business, then you need to be way beyond compliance. Compliance is just a baseline of the minimum standards that's expected. Aim to be multidisciplinary. So by that I mean we need to make sure that we're pulling together all the disciplines that are involved in cyber risk management. Make sure you've got the supply chain people, procurement people involved. Make sure you've got legal. Make sure you've got human resources. Make sure you've got IT. Make sure you've got the business leaders, the stakeholders, everybody that's involved together on the same page, because that's what cyber resilience takes, is that you're trying to reduce the likelihood and the impact of any kind of cyber event and increase your ability to be able to detect, respond and recover from that incident. So you need to have the key people together to be able to do that. Aim to balance your short-term goals with longer-term imperatives. You may make decisions under fire. You may make decisions under pressure, but you don't want to regret those in the long term. So if decisions have been made in order to keep businesses operating, now it's time to tidy those things up, to readjust, to deal with those risks, to treat them properly and effectively and get back to the new normal. So inertia is the cyber contagion. So what I mean is that if we do nothing, then we are going to have a problem. So the weaknesses that are there within the systems, the lack of maintenance that may have been carried on over the periods of lockdown due to COVID-19, the increased risk profile, the increased risk surface, all of those things, if we don't do something, well then that's effectively the contagion, because we're going to have a much bigger problem if we don't work together and we don't deal with these things. So where do we start? Well, we need to start looking inwardly at our cyber DNA. We need to understand why understanding our cyber DNA is so important. So a quick refresher, a quick look at a business model. So every business has a unique business model, and based on that business model, they'll have a certain requirement for how they use technology, how they use cloud-based services, endpoints, whatever their technology they want to use, big data, artificial intelligence, whatever it happens to be. And that technology, that use of technology, carries with it certain related requirement drivers that are made up of business requirement drivers, legal requirement drivers, and regulatory drivers. In other words, for you to carry out your business model using that business information communication technology requirements, then you need to make sure you're operating legally. Because remember again, when it comes to laws and regulations, there's two sides of these. You can use them to protect you, and they can be enforced on any bad guys who are trying to do something to your organization. But the other side is you need to be able to use those and leverage those and make sure that you are compliant with them. On one side we have our cyber threat actors, and on the other side we have internal and external parties. And at all times you're trying to drive through a cyber strategy that the board is going to be able to monitor, evaluate and direct. And that's effectively your cyber strategy. So if we look at the impact of COVID-19, that has changed the way we're using business ICT requirements. So that may change the way our overheads are in relation to the requirement drivers. Our business model will have changed. So the knock-on effect of your business and operational model changing means your business ICT requirements may change, means those legal regulatory drivers change, and effectively then your cyber strategy has to be readjusted to deal with that. Let's just take a quick deeper look at some of those cyber strategy requirement drivers, or certainly a little revision on it. It's made up of different things. It's made up of everything from regulatory drivers such as the EU GDPR. You might have local cyber laws. You might have business drivers such as that you're compliant with ISO 27001, and that might be something that you're aligned to. But the reality is, depending on where you're operating in the world, depending on what you're doing, depending on what size your organization is, depending on what sector you're in, all of those factors relate back to what laws, regulations and so on that you have to be aligned with. So for example, if you're operating right across North America, there's actually over 40 different mandatory breach notification laws there. So there's different things handled in a different way all around the world, and you need to make sure wherever you're operating. So if your business model has transformed hugely with C19 and all of a sudden you're delivering your services all over the world, well, you need to make sure you're delivering those legally, that you're protecting the data of the citizens of those local jurisdictions where you're delivering those, because most regulations are now developed and written with the local citizens in mind. So whether it's the California Privacy Act and so on, there's all of these kinds of things are all based on local citizens, and you have to make sure if you're delivering services into those local environments over the internet, then that you're compliant with the law. So let's look at how these things line up. Again, I will use this analogy of the two wheels on the car. You want the car to drive forward. You need both things aligned. You need to have a cyber strategy completely aligned with the business strategy. So if your business strategy has changed because of COVID-19, and instead of being a retail outfit, you're now all online, or now you have digitally transformed your business and you now have an app and you're delivering services that way instead of face-to-face with customers, whatever it happens to be, whatever those subtle or massive or changes are within your business model, they mean that you need to adjust your cyber strategy and make sure both things are aligned. The governance and oversight is the steering wheel. And of course, we have the cyber risk framework, which is the chassis keeping everything together. And as I've alluded to before, the atoms within that metal and framework are the laws, the regulation and compliance that hold and glue everything together and make it strong and make sure that it's fit for purpose. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take a moment to go through 10 key steps that you can take in order to make sure that you are readjusting to the new normal, and that you are building in effective cyber resilience. So step number 1, create a culture of cyber resilience. Acknowledge the importance of proactive cyber risk management. So not the old culture and the old viewpoint of, well, if something happens, we'll deal with it. You can actually be proactive with cyber resilience. You can anticipate events. You can plan. You can prepare. You can use cyber intelligence. There are lots of different ways to implement an effective, mature, proactive cyber risk activities that will help your cyber resilience piece. So make sure that you've implemented cyber resilience governance. Make sure somebody is responsible. These are just some key things you can do. Make sure that there's somebody managing it, owning it, responsible for it. So appoint someone in charge. Go beyond compliance. Compliance should not be your target, should certainly not be your baseline. It is just, that's your minimum level that you want to get to. You need to understand, what does the business need, because there's a delta between what the business needs and compliance. And that is, effectively, in many cases, represents your residual risk or your residual cyber risk. And you want to be working on that. You want to make sure that you're managing that as effectively as you can. So go way beyond that and enable the business. Strengthen the behavior, reinforce behavior within the organization through collaboration, communication between your cyber resilience team, all the multidisciplinary people who are involved in it within your organization, and make sure everybody understands that as you change, it's important to make sure that the controls, communication, and everything around those is also effective. Make risk-informed decisions. Do not make emotional decisions. Do not make subjective decisions based on what's happening within the organization. You need to be able to measure risk, whether you're using key risk indicators, whether you're using cyber risk quantification of some sort to define where the risk is. But measure your risk, measure your inherent risk, measure your residual risk, so that you're actually measuring to make informed decisions, as opposed to saying, well, this is pretty good, I think we're okay, we don't need to do anything, or we think that's risky, let's do something. That is not risk-informed decisions. So use some sort of CRQ, cyber risk quantification technique. Remembering quantification is about being able to put a number on something, as opposed to a description of something, which is the qualitative perspective of it. So use meaningful metrics, something that the business will understand. If you can relate them back to the business objectives and business goals, all the better. Take a zero trust approach to dealing with your supply chain. So if you're looking at metrics for your business and you're trying to take risk-informed decision, you can't simply ask your supplier, well, guys, how are you doing around COVID-19? How are you doing with C19? Is everything okay on your side? And then they say, yes, that's fine. You need evidence. You are responsible. You can delegate, but cannot abdicate responsibility. And remembering with things like, the EU GDPR, it's not about, just third-party risk, it's fourth party, fifth party, and so on. You're responsible for this. So you need to take a zero-trust approach and make sure that you verify and validate that your supply chain are handling the processing of any of your data or any of your cybersecurity and risk controls in an effective manner. Focus on your critical assets. Make sure you understand what's important to your organization. Again, with an adjustment in your operational model, the assets that now may be much more important to you. Certain assets may be that weren't previously. Websites, VPN technology, remote access systems, all of those things may be much more important to you now. So you need to focus on those. Make sure that you are enforcing a level of cyber hygiene. So cyber hygiene is just those basic kind of controls. Make sure patching is covered off. Make sure people have anti-malware, endpoint protection, there's logging on, all of those kind of things. So basic cyber hygiene is in place to make sure that this new infrastructure ecosystem and model that you're using is as secure as it should be. Enforce and implement monitoring. If you have now many more people working remotely, many more potential points on your network system as well, you need to make sure that you're monitoring those things, and you need to use automated systems to do that 24/7. Have systems that are monitoring the traffic, defining patterns of new known good behavior on traffic, setting off the appropriate alerts if there's a correlation of activities on your network and nefarious activity being spotted. Invest and implement and mature any controls you have around identity and access management. This is key. If people are now no longer relying on the physical entry controls into an office to access computers, which then access the systems and the information, and you're going to be able to trust people remotely, then we need to make sure that the identity and access management systems are at the appropriate level. And automate as much as possible. Pre-COVID, there was already a massive demand and a shortfall of supply of cybersecurity and risk experts. So now it's going to be even harder to get access to those kinds of people. So if there are processes you can automate, then automate them. Whether it's collection of information, analysis, and so on. But don't automate any broken processes. So if the process needs to be redesigned, or it doesn't, or it has poison metrics. So what I'm talking about there is if your current system is using subjective metrics, and they're not quantitative based, so that there's no science behind them, and there's no point in feeding them into a system and automating something around that basis. So revisit everything with a fresh perspective and make sure that if you are redefining a process, then look to see can you automate it as much as possible. Update as you transition to the new normal. When will the new normal be here? This is going to be a continual transformation over a long period of time. And we have to acknowledge that and accept that. So that means what we need to do is we need to continually document, and we need to continue to test and improve everything as we go along. So every day is a new normal. We need to make sure that we're transitioning this journey we're on. So test and challenge any assumptions that are being made, and make sure if COVID-19 has done nothing else for businesses, it has highlighted the need for a crisis management plan within businesses so that they can understand what they do in the event of a crisis. So make sure your crisis management plan is updated, make sure it's appropriate based on your new model, and so on. Identify your business value chain. So your business value chain are all of those parts that make up your business. So if we start off looking at your business value chain internally within an organization, that might be made up of, for example, different departments and different key pieces. Then you might have local regional offices. Then you may have other links on your business value chain, such as your key suppliers, your tier 1 suppliers, maybe tier 2 suppliers, tier 3 suppliers, and so on. And your chain gets longer and longer. Any weaknesses in those links are effectively, that security chain, your security risk framework is only as good as the weakest link. So it's very important to identify each of these pieces individually, prioritize them by their importance, and in relation to the interdependence, interconnectedness of the systems and services that you're delivering, and try and support and invoke an increased collective situational awareness. So in other words, what do I mean by that? I mean that everybody who's key to this, so your suppliers rely on you for business, you rely on your suppliers. Make sure that you're both in this game together. Make sure you both realize that it's in both your interests to invest in cybersecurity and risk, to adjust and to put in the appropriate controls in place so that people can deal with these issues. Remember this, that every single business is unique. There are no two businesses the same. And that's why it's so important that you calculate your inherent cyber risk metric. This metric is so important in deciding what controls should be put in place, what maturity level of controls be put in place. If you're calculating the cost benefit of risk leverage and so on from those controls and treating any residual risk, it's so important to understand what your cyber risk level is from an inherent perspective. And then, of course, with that, you can work out what your residual risk is. But from that perspective, I mean, what we need to understand is that in the event of something like a major cyber incident, and if it goes towards the world of fines and pecuniary damages from anybody who's affected and potentially litigation and so on, then people need to be able to demonstrate by having the right kinds of documentation put in place that the right decisions were being made. And if those decisions are being made on an inherent risk level versus the maturity of the controls put in place, then that is very powerful information, very useful information in the post-breach analysis if an incident occurred. Identify and understand what you have in place, not just from the point of view of making sure that you've got up-to-date network diagrams, making sure that you understand all your assets, where they're interconnected, where your digital assets are, your soft assets and so on, all of those things. But identify what strengths and controls you have put in place, because then you can understand where the risk is coming from. So if we look at our friend here in the parachute, him jumping out of the airplane, the risk of him hitting the ground is and not making it is pretty high. However, his control is the parachute. So by putting in that control, his residual risk has now been minimized. So there's a lot less risk in him being killed when he lands on the ground. So it's very important to understand what controls are put in place, because then we can focus on where the residual risk is. Establish metrics and measure to manage. You can't manage cyber risk if you're not measuring it. Effectively, putting resources, time, energy into just everything in a broad, holistic framework of cybersecurity, risk, and privacy is not the way to handle this. You need to understand where your risks are, where you're going to get most bang for buck. Is it going to be training your staff? Is it going to be updating policies, procedures? Is it going to be investing in some technology? All these kind of areas. And until you understand what metrics you're managing, and from a very, very baseline perspective, I would always suggest to an organization that they're measuring at least their inherent risk, at least the maturity level of their controls, and at the very least the residual risk. And if they can relate that back to their business strategy, goals and objectives, all the better. And collaborate. This isn't about an IT department. This isn't about an IT security department or a cybersecurity function or the CISO or the chief risk officer. It's about everybody. It's about instilling that cultural awareness, a cyber cultural awareness throughout the organization, that the risk landscape has changed. If you have 500 people working for your organization, that's 500 people that should be looking to protect your organization, not 500 weak points that can make mistakes and cause issues. So you need to get everybody on the same page from a cyber cultural and risk point of view, but also to collaborate in relation to developing the appropriate cyber resilience framework for your organization. So in other words, you need to have legal, you need to have HR, you need to have IT, you need all those key stakeholders, and there should be buy-in from the board. You need CEO or the equivalent level to buy in and give a constituency to the cyber resilience program, so that they understand that it has authority and a mandate to do what they need to do within the organization. Update your strategy, because your strategy has changed, so your cyber strategy should be updated. Be brave and continue, because things are going to change. You'll deal with problems, you'll have ideas, you'll deal with the challenges, and you'll deal with all these things and move forward. But remember this, one of the impacts of C19 may be a positive one from the point of view that digitalization will continue to accelerate, because this is literally the way of the world. This is the new normal, and the new normal is going to be more and more things being digitally transformed and available on the internet. So even those things that were progressing in that way are going to be accelerated. We've talked about the business models transforming at such pace as well. Identify opportunities. Change brings opportunity. You may find better ways of doing things. You may find ways to save your organization money. You may find ways to get a better return on investment in some of the cybersecurity controls or the vendors that you're using. All of these things are opportunities that you will discover as you embrace the change that COVID-19 has brought to the operational model and also to your cyber risk model. In the Chinese language, the word crisis is composed of two characters, one representing danger and the other opportunity, John F. Kennedy. And I think, this is a good slide to finish up on, because COVID-19 is a great case study to use in relation to why cyber resilience is so important, because change will happen. And that change may bring positive things and it may bring negative things. But what it means is that from a risk perspective, from a risk management perspective, from a cyber risk management perspective, we have to be able to change with the times and make sure that we're doing things to support the business, to enable the business, to empower the business leaders, to be able to be as innovative, creative and successful as they can be. And that is why cyber risk management and being able to support that in the business is so important at this time. So look, there's an awful lot in there. There's an awful lot of areas of the business that are impacted as a consequence of C19. Therefore, an awful lot of the associated cyber risks have changed. So hopefully you've got an awful lot of actions out of that, or information out of that you can act upon in order to help you deal and readjust with the changes that have come about because of COVID-19 and the impact that they have had on your cyber risk posture. One of the ways in which we can help you, that is CRI Cyber Risk International, is by working with you and you subscribing to our platform, CyberPrism. CyberPrism is an award-winning platform that helps organizations ascertain the status of their existing cybersecurity framework vis-a-vis their inherent cyber risk. So it's perfect for this kind of situation where you want to understand how, from a management perspective, your people, your processes and your technology are meeting the challenge that is now in front of you. So for those of you who have had a change in your operation models, this is a perfect way of finding out where those risks now sit in the organization and making sure that you are dealing with those appropriately, developing the right kind of strategy and framework to deal with those things. As a result of COVID-19, one of the things we have done over the last few months is we have implemented a number of changes within the software itself and the platform so that it's able to help organizations identify more specifically some of those risks, specifically around areas such as working from home. But look, if you're interested in knowing more about how we can help you and the wraparound services that we can help in delivering that and helping you on that journey of transition to the new normal, then please reach out to us. You can find out more information, and indeed you can even set up a demonstration, a live demonstration with either myself or one of my colleagues at cri.ie. That's cri.ie, and you can register there, and we'll work with you and we'll help you deal with all of the challenges that are related to this. On the other side of things, in relation to the world of ICTTF, that's the International Cyber Threat Task Force, and many of you know I sit as the president of that, and we have an awful lot going on there as well in order to help share and transmit the information to help people deal with these kind of challenges. One of the most recent projects we've been involved with is in the delivery of a certified cyber training course called the CCRO. That's the Certified Cyber Risk Officer course. And this course has been brought to you in partnership with the likes of the International Compliance Association, the ICS, the Irish Computer Society, and you can find out more up at icttf.org. There's an 8-week online program aimed at business leaders so that they can learn through practical exercises, assignments, video tutorials, interactive material, online instructor-led training sessions and so on, to bring you right through a training program so you can empower your own staff within in order how to understand to deal with all of these related challenges to cyber risk. But look, there's enough on that. If you want to know more about that, please visit icttf.org, or if you're a member of the International Compliance Association, please visit their website, or indeed the Irish Computer Society has more information on their website. So look, I hope you all stay safe, and I hope to see you all soon. Hopefully you found this webinar very useful, and please feel free to reach out to us. We're here to help you as much as we can, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you all for your time today. Cheers.